After months of negotiations, the US-backed proposal for Gaza appeared to have reached its biggest milestone yet. Hamas has indicated it is prepared to disarm under a framework negotiated with the Board of Peace. Well, on paper, that sounds like a breakthrough many have been waiting for, but the reaction from Israel has been notably caution. Now, instead of treating Hamas's willingness to disarm as the end of the conflict, Israeli officials continue to insist that words alone cannot guarantee security. And now, even more interestingly, the US-backed Board of Peace appear to have adjusted its own roadmap following a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, suggesting that Israeli troop withdrawals may now be tied more closely to verify disarmament than previously indicated. So now the question is, has Washington quietly moved closer to Israel's security position? And if Hamas has agreed to disarm, why is the IDF still reluctant to leave Gaza? Well, come along as we answer these two very important questions, because what happens next in Gaza will determine the future of the enclave for decades to come. Well, only days ago, the proposed roadmap appeared to envision Israeli military withdrawals and Hamas's disarmament proceeding together. Hamas had maintained that Israeli forces should withdraw as it surrender its weapon. However, after senior Board of Peace officials met Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the messaging appeared to have changed. According to multiple reports, the board now indicates that the IDF may remain beyond the so-called yellow line until the disarmament process is completed rather than withdrawing simultaneously. Well, this represents an important shift because it aligns more closely with Israel's long-standing position that military withdrawal should follow, not precede verified security improvements in Gaza. While neither Washington nor Tel Aviv has described this as a policy reversal, the revised sequencing suggests greater emphasis on Israeli security concerns during the implementation. Well, for Israel, it's a win-win situation obviously, because this reduces the risk of preventing previous ceasefire mistakes when Hamas made a U-turn for its position despite political agreements and repeated promises. Now, at first look, Hamas agreeing to disarm appears to solve the conflict's central issue, but the real challenge is not securing an agreement. It is ensuring that the agreement is actually carried out, and that too on ground, not just on paper. And let's be very clear, till now several important questions remain unanswered. Who will verify that weapons are surrendered? What happens to Hamas's vast tunnel network? How will rockets, drones and explosives be accounted for? Will every Hamas commander comply? What about other armed factions such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad? And then comes the last and perhaps the most important one. What happens if Hamas and other such groups secretly retain weapons? Well, all these questions matter because groups like Hamas rarely rely solely on conventional arsenals. Weapons can be dispersed, hidden underground, or transferred to allied groups. Now, even if heavy weapons are surrendered, intelligence agencies would still want confidence that production facilities, smuggling routes and military infrastructure have been dismantled completely. Well, this is why Israeli officials continue to argue that declarations alone cannot substitute for independently verified demilitarization. Well, the evolving negotiations may appear to many that Washington is placing greater weight on Israel's security concerns than earlier draft talked about. The emerging framework increasingly links Israeli withdrawals to measurable progress in Hamas's disarmament instead of fixed political timelines as mentioned in earlier drafts. But on the other hand, interestingly, recent developments also indicate that the United States continues working with the Board of Peace trying to create verification mechanisms and an international stabilizing framework for Gaza after Hamas's military capabilities are actually dismantled. And at the same time, there still remains differences between Washington and Tel Aviv. For example, board officials have urged de-escalation and expressed concerns over continuing Israeli strikes, while Israel argues that military operations are necessary until complete security threats are addressed. Well, at this point, it seems rather than unconditional support for either side, the current US approach appears aimed at balancing progress towards a political settlement with Israel's demand for enforceable security guarantees. Now, based on current negotiation and Israel's publicly stated positions, several conditions would likely need to be satisfied before a full IDF withdrawal becomes realistic. First comes Hamas's disarmament would need to be independently verified rather than merely announced. Second, Gaza would need to be effectively demilitarized, including weapon stockpiles, tunnels, rocket production sites, and other military infrastructure. Well, third is another authority, potentially supported by the Board of Peace and an international stabilizing force, would need to assume responsibility for maintaining law and order in Gaza. And fourth would likely seek assurances that armed groups cannot quickly rebuild their military capabilities through smuggling or renewed recruitment. Well, these four conditions reflect Israel's stated objective of preventing a return to the pre-war security environment. Whether they can all be achieved remains certainly uncertain, and negotiations continue over the sequencing and verification of each step. But the latest developments suggest that the debate is no longer simply about whether Hamas is willing to disarm. But the more difficult question is how such disarmament would be actually verified, enforced, and most importantly sustained. Well, the apparent adjustment in the Board of Peace's roadmap after talks with Netanyahu indicates that security verification may now carry greater weight before major Israeli withdrawal takes place. And at the same time, the United States continues to pursue a framework that seeks to combine a political settlement with practical security arrangements. Now, whether this approach produces a lasting peace will depend less on promises made at negotiation table and more on whether the mechanism created afterwards can convince all sides that Gaza will not return to another cycle of war. Well, with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goyal signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.
هذا كان خمسة حداد قال لك الحداد بعتوا عشاء قال له روح ولا شادي يطلع